Hello, good afternoon or good morning everyone, depending on where you are, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Maddalaine Ansell, Director of Education at the British Council, and welcome to this meeting, which marks the launch of new research from the British Council and the Association of Commonwealth Universities, looking at the role of international higher education partnerships in contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. This study builds on a portfolio of evidence showing the positive role that tertiary education can make to support development. We commissioned a rigorous review of the evidence, which was published in October 2020, which found that tertiary education makes positive contributions to economic and non-economic development by supporting economic growth for countries and enhanced earnings for graduates, and that it also generates skills and employment opportunities. It contributes positively to the quality of life for those who participate in it, and it can play a very important role in strengthening and building the capacity of a vibrant and engaged civil society, and can lead to graduates demanding equality and driving social change. And it can also strengthen basic education provision, as well as graduates contributing to national health systems and peace building. The study we're publishing today looks specifically at the role of international partnerships in higher education and how these can contribute to meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Recent years have been challenging for everyone, including the higher education community, but at the same time, the value of higher education has become increasingly clear as we have relied on the expertise and knowledge of universities, not just for the development of vaccines, but for epidemiology, risk management, and developing a greater understanding of how societies and economies can adapt and recover. It's been said before that COVID-19 is unlikely to be the last global crisis we face, and the higher education community has a responsibility to support societies to respond to and recover from future difficult times. The research that we're launching today highlights that international cooperation is an effective and efficient way to address global challenges, and that specifically international higher education partnerships can play a part in addressing all the Sustainable Development Goals. COVID and the consequential restrictions on mobility and constraints on funding are of course a concern, and there is a clear challenge to all of us to ensure that international HE partnerships can continue to support development of the Sustainable Development Goals. But in addition to funding, this report finds that the main components of a successful partnership include mutual trust, shared vision, and long-term commitment to working collaboratively, all values which are shared by the British Council and the Association of Commonwealth Universities, and which are the foundation of the partnerships we participate in or support. Successful international collaboration benefits all partners, including through strengthened curricula, innovative pedagogies, and improved international reputation. The partnership model also provides added value to the investments of international donors and funders. The international higher education community is vital to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and we in the ACU can contribute by facilitating and supporting international HE partnerships. About today's session, the event is being recorded, so we'd welcome and encourage you to share the link to this report and to the session recording. You can find this link in the chat now. The structure of the event is as follows. We will shortly hear a brief presentation from the report author on the research and the main findings, and we'll then have a discussion between practitioners involved in international partnerships and a policy implementer and potential funder of international HE partnerships. There will be an opportunity for you to submit your questions and comments to shape the discussion, and many thanks to those of you who have already contributed questions. We have considered all of these and used many to inform the discussion which will follow. I'd encourage you all to use the question bar to submit your questions throughout the session, and also to like questions by clicking the thumb icon to indicate to us which are the most popular questions. So without more ado, I'd now like to introduce Dr. Adam Krcal, Principal Consultant at Technopolis Group. Adam has expertise in analysis and evaluation in research, development and education, and has a particular interest in higher education policy evaluation, including funding, quality assurance, governance and internationalisation. Adam was the project manager for this study and the lead author for the report, and will now present an overview of the study and a summary of the findings. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Maddalaine, and it's really very nice to be here today and to present the results of our research. I would also like to thank the team at King's College in London who conducted the research with us, but also the British Council and the ACU for their support and inputs during the study. I will try to focus today on the most important findings in my presentation, given the very limited time we have today. We conducted the research last year, and the main aim of the project was to better understand how international higher education partnerships contribute to the SDGs and the added value of the partnership model, as well as the issues of equity among partners and sustainability of the outcomes of these partnerships. So one of the headline findings of the research is that international higher education partnerships contribute very significantly to the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda. We have been able to find links between outcomes of the partnerships and the SDGs for all partnerships that we studied, which also reflects the crucial and pivotal role of higher education for national development that Maddalaine has just been speaking about. Partnerships are relevant for all SDGs, although we have seen outcomes linked to SDG 4, which is the education goal, and SDG 17, which is the goal around partnerships, more often than links to the other goals. Looking across the partnerships, we have identified two main avenues how outcomes of partnerships translate into the contribution to the SDG. The first one is through enrichment of knowledge base in specific areas or disciplines. So here the partnerships do not implement or scale up the solutions in practice. Instead, other organizations from the public sector or NGOs are in charge of that. And partnerships can also act as implementers of the solutions. These are typically teaching and learning partnerships where the rollout of the new curricula or pedagogical method is often part of the activities. Our consultations have confirmed that the SDGs are interlinked. It is very important to look at the SDGs as a set of 17 goals rather than single goals, and one SDG cannot be achieved without the others. And this also means that higher education partnerships can address the wider societal issues better than single organizations. This slide is a summary of factors driving the contribution to the SDGs at the partnership level. I would just like to highlight the crucial importance of the senior leadership buy-in, especially among the Southern partners, which is something that we have seen repeatedly across the case studies. And when it is not there, the partnerships tends to struggle. Shared vision and long-term commitment to working together are also very important factors. And we have seen this in the case studies along with the other drivers that I'm showing on this slide. Drivers go hand in hand with challenges. So again, just a summary of main ones. I think the effect of the COVID pandemic, especially on mobility of both students and academics, is probably the major challenge right now. And just to stress also the volatility of funding and the short-term nature of some of those external grants, we have seen partnerships where the commitment to working together has been much more important than securing external funding. And these partnerships tend to cope much better in this volatile environment. And also monitoring and measuring the contribution to the SDGs remains a big issue across the globe, and not just at the partnership level. Now, I would like to summarize the main findings on the issue of equity in partnerships. There's no definition of an equitable partnership, but we have found several contributing factors. One of them is related to the choice of partners, and we see that long-term partnerships tend to be more equitable than younger partnerships. And this is because the partners have had longer time to establish trust in each other. Partners in the global north are often seen by southern partners as more credible with funders, and southern partners often believe that they wouldn't stand chances in proposal evaluation if they didn't have northern partners on board. Taking a lead role remains another challenge for southern partners, as they often don't have the necessary grant management capacity required by funders. So there is a continuously growing emphasis for a more important role of southern partners, and funders are increasingly pushing for equity in project proposals. Equity in agenda setting remains another issue of concern, and more support from funders is needed for capacity building pre-application in order to help prospective partnerships to build the necessary capacity and to level the playing field a bit more. Benefits stemming from partnerships are in general better defined for southern partners, and they typically include new curricular design, innovations in pedagogy, and other things. And what is important is that these benefits often generate impact in communities locally, which is something that we don't see that often in the global north. We have found several ways of how international higher education partnerships deliver added value to other forms of interventions or funding. The partnership model allows to mobilize more resources and complementary expertise across the partners. And the partnership model also provides more opportunities for mutual learning and for networking. When we interviewed universities and other stakeholders in the Global South, it was mentioned several times that universities in the Global South don't tend to have strong, well-established relationships with each other. And partnerships provide opportunities for strengthening these relationships and for sustained interactions between them. One final point on this slide is about the ability of the partnerships to address wider societal challenges. By being more suited for interdisciplinary approaches, as I mentioned earlier, partnerships can address wider societal issues more easily and efficiently. And this slide provides a summary of the main findings on the sustainability of partnerships and their results. I would like to highlight the main components of sustainability that we have identified across the partnerships. First of all, it is good teamwork and internal relations among the partners and the already mentioned trust, mutual trust. Secondly, the embeddedness of governance procedures and an appropriate distribution of leadership responsibilities. Engaging stakeholders and community in the partnership is also important because no long-term impact is possible without them. And where the partnerships have managed to generate within their local communities a sense of ownership of the results, the sustainability tends to be less of an issue. So these are the main conclusions and implications from our research. We divided them into two groups. First of all, for funders, we see a need to keep embedding the SDGs in their funding programs, but also a need to provide support for the partnerships with monitoring and evaluation of their progress towards the SDGs. Funders could also emphasize more the crucial role of southern partners in partnership agenda setting, and they can also consider providing more longer-term support rather than shorter one-off contracts. There's also a need for recognition of the long-term consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and further research of what an equitable partnership should look like is needed. We have also identified a relatively recent trend of establishing partnership platforms, which provide opportunities for various partnerships to get together and share learning and knowledge. The cluster run by the International Association of Universities and the United Nations Office for Partnerships are just 2 examples of these initiatives. For partners who are higher education institutions, we see a need to keep working on the identification of the benefits stemming from international partnerships. And this applies to both southern and northern partners, and partners should always consider how equitable these benefits are. There's also a need to keep exploring how the success of the partnerships can be built upon further. For example, how the SDGs can be integrated into institutional strategies and policies. And that is all from me. Thank you very much for attention, and back to Maddalaine.
Thank you very much, Adam, both for a very clear presentation and also for all the work you did in leading the research. We're now going to move to the discussion part of the event, where we will hear from Nikki Stoddart, the Deputy Director of Education at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and from Dr. Albert Luswata, Director of the Institute of Ethics at Uganda's Martyrs University. But first, I'd like to introduce Professor Pamela Dube, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of the Western Cape in South Africa, who will chair a discussion about this study and its findings. Over to you, Pamela.
Thank you very much, Maddalaine, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Special thanks to the 2 panel members, Nikki and Albert, and appreciation to you for availing yourselves to share your expertise and experience as important role players involved in international higher education partnerships. For me, as a member of the ACU Higher Education and the SDGs Network Steering Committee, which I co-chair with Professor Philip McGowan of Newcastle University, this discussion and the launch of the study report in particular is of great interest to us as a committee advancing the notion of higher education's essential and unique role in contributing to SDGs and the relevance of international university networks in enhancing this contribution. And of course, in addition, in my current role within my the context of my university, which is a role player in North-South partnerships, there's huge interest and excitement about this launch. So to start the discussion, for the next 20 minutes, I will pose some questions to both panelists, which should allow then for free-flowing conversation. And then for the last 15 to 20 minutes of this discussion slot, we will go through the audience questions, a number of which were pre-submitted already. So starting with you, Nikki. You are the Deputy Director Education at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. As you reflect on this study, would you say that the FCDO does also see international partnerships in higher education as an effective way of addressing the SDGs? And if you could also share with us some of the priorities of the FCDO with regard to supporting international partnerships in higher education. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Pamela, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody who's joined this event. Thanks also to the British Council and the ACU for inviting me to participate in it, and to Adam for an excellent report, which I really enjoyed reading. Thank you for your question, Pamela. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm Deputy Director for Education, Gender and Equality at the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office here in the UK. One of the areas of FCDO's work that I'm responsible for is the investment that the UK government makes in higher education, in tertiary education internationally, including across a large number of developing countries. And we do this because we believe, and as Adam's research really backs up, that an investment in tertiary education really helps drive development and achieve the SDGs. And again, as the report shows, not just for the sort of the obvious education, SDG, SDG 4, but actually across all 17 SDGs. We really believe that investing in international partnerships and in higher education can help ensure a more sustainable future for all. We believe it helps build stronger societies, stronger economies. And why? Because better educated and skilled women and men in the countries in which we work will then in turn really help build a more productive economy and help raise overall living standards, which is of course central to all the SDGs in the way that Adam and previously Maddalaine have outlined. We also actually firmly believe, and believe there's lots of evidence to show us that an investment in tertiary education is really in the UK's own interest. It's really in our own national interest, our sort of global interest, because it creates these incredibly strong international partnerships and relationships, which we then take with us across a lot of the work that we do in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And I think it's those partnerships that really then sort of cement some of the sort of the innovative approaches that we can then take, that we can then support to help drive forward progress on the SDGs. I suppose reflecting on the report, I was really pleased to see that the report sort of backs all of that up. I think it supports the approach that we are trying to take in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to really support international partnerships to drive forward work in tertiary education. One of the programmes that I wanted to specifically flag today is the SPHERE programme, which stands for the Strategic Partnerships in Higher Education for Innovation and Reform. It's an acronym that always tests me, which is managed by a British Council-led consortium. But that really looks to work through international partnerships to transform the quality, relevance, access, affordability, etc. of higher education. I mean, you asked me, Pamela, what the FCDO's priorities are for supporting international partnerships in higher education. Well, I think a sort of top priority for us at the moment is economic empowerment, particularly economic empowerment for girls. And as we know, underpinning all of that is education, and not just the 12 years of quality education that the UK government strongly supports across the developing countries in which we operate, but also higher education. How do we really ensure that young men, women can transition into the labour market in the country in which they live? So how are we working through some of those partnerships to make sure that people have the skills, the knowledge, the education to work in sectors in which they will actually be able to get jobs? So sort of matching, I suppose, the sort of work we do with partners with the sort of the economic agenda to ensure that that transition makes sense is absolutely key for us. Probably the last thing I'll say before I allow you to pass on to somebody else is that, of course, addressing and thinking about how we respond to COVID-19 is crucial, continues to be crucial in the way that you've outlined. I think it's been really interesting to see how so much of what's happened in the sector pivoted very, very well to deliver a lot online, to deliver resources remotely, so that a lot of the fantastic work that goes on in these partnerships could continue. So I think actually, despite all of the challenges that have been spoken about a bit already, there's a lot that's very positive that we can look to build on more. One example of this I'll quickly flag is that there's a SPHERE supported partnership across a number of East African countries that was doing quite a lot of that sort of online blended learning type approach even prior to the pandemic, was then able to really build on that. And I think around sort of 17,000 students across East Africa have really been able to benefit from that. I'll stop there. I've probably spoken too much already and pass back to you, Pamela. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very useful information and insights, really, especially into the priorities of the FCDO. And thank you for highlighting that program, the SPHERE program, and the work that's been done there. So just to get through to Albert now, if Albert, you could please share with us from your experience of building and sustaining international higher education partnerships, What benefits do you derive from these international partnerships? As you know, building partnerships is not very easy. It's always, and there's also contextual, geographical, and other related issues. So why do you do them, and how do you get to succeed in sustaining those partnerships? Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. I greet everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I would like to say that there are many benefits of these international partnerships, because first of all, we are talking of partnerships including those between higher education institutions in the global north and those in the global south, but also multi-stakeholder collaborations between higher education institutions and the communities and other institutions and organizations, both from the public and the private sectors. So these come with enormous benefits in the important areas of teaching and learning, in the research and the community engagement, and this enhance development and fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals as we've had them. I just want to draw from personal experience with the two of the sphere projects in which my university, Uganda Matters University, has participated, and I would say we have seen, due to these partnerships, we have seen tremendous transformations, especially in the areas of teaching and learning at our universities, and the entire environment of learning and teaching has changed. We have seen many pedagogical changes taking place, unlike before, and many new pedagogical patterns have come out of these projects through course redesign and the things of the kind. And we have realized these partnerships have empowered both the faculty and students, and they appreciated them. For instance, we have in our region, in the East African region, we had reports from the MasterCard and the Inter-University Council for East Africa. They were showing a very big gap between the skills given by the universities and the skills needed on the market. And these projects have helped to link the higher education institutions with the industry and the communities to really bridge this gap. Before this, the universities were working in isolation as ivory towers, and there was that mistrust between the universities and the communities and industry, because the universities thought the communities and industry don't know the skills they need, and the other way around, the industry also mistrusted the kind of skills that were being given. So this link was very, very important. With these projects, we saw that they started working together. We saw members of the communities and from the industry engaged in the teaching of the graduates, and I thought this was a very key achievement. The other area I would appreciate briefly is the capacity building. We have seen from the report, especially the universities from the global south, in some areas, even managing projects of this level, we did not have much capacity. So working in partnerships is very key and has helped us to build capacity, which also helps in sustainability going forward. So I think this is very important. Like the report shows, probably the benefits could be more inclined to the global south, but also the global north has many, because chances to do research and the global challenges are normally similar. So we find ways of addressing them, and we learn a lot from each other. Of course, like you've asked Pamela, building partnerships is not always easy, true. But like I said, such partnerships are very, very important. And because we realize that each partner has certain unique attributes and experiences they bring on board. So when they come together, it's very important instead of working in isolation. And if you want systemic change, I think all stakeholders need to be brought on board instead of working in isolation. So I would think that that was very important that we work together.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Albert, and especially also for elaborating on my next question, which would have been also really specifically about the value add of these partnerships. And I think you've provided us with a lot of information there, and also brought in that, you know, the importance also of the multi-stakeholder relations and collaborations that happen between universities and communities, and how then these international partnerships also add value to those collaborations. So that's very important information, and the work that you've done, for instance, with the MasterCard Foundation. So that's useful information also. Just to get maybe to the next question around equity. I know it came out also of the report, you know, the whole issue of equitable treatment and within the partnerships. Maybe starting with you, Nikki, if you could just share with us what you think funders could do to promote equity in the partnerships that they fund.
Thanks, Pamela, and thanks, Albert. That was all really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, the question of equity is I think a really important one. I think it's a top priority for us from the FCDO, and something we always think about when we're you know, designing a new initiative. I think there are some different component parts to this. It's essential, in my view, that there's equity between the different sides of the partnership. So we really need to think about whether there's sort of balance there, and that might be, you know, input between the partners at the sort of the design of program stage. It might be equity in the governance arrangements for how the initiative is being taken forward. It might be equity in terms of the sort of the monitoring and evaluation of the impact of whatever has been set up through the partnership. One of the things that's incredibly important to ensure that equity, and I know that the British Council has done some great work on through the Sphere initiative, is to make sure that at the outset of what we do, that we're thinking about whether the capacity is there in both sides of the partnership, in both institutions, if you like, to ensure that equity. So does the partner, for example, in the Global South, have the capacity, the capability to do some of that stuff on an equal footing to the partner, in this case, who would be in the UK? So how can we strengthen that at the outset? How can we ensure that that there's capacity in the institution that we're working with to do all aspects of that, whether it's sort of, you know, drafting proposal stage or thinking about how you monitor and evaluate what you're doing. You can't really ensure equity if you're not sort of setting that up from the outset and ensuring that sort of level playing field in terms of the skills and capabilities on each side of the partnership. For me, though, the question of equity also really gets down to the what is the partnership trying to do as well, and making sure there's equity within that. For us from FCDO, when we look at anything that we want to fund, whether it's in the education sector or elsewhere, this is a central question for us. You know, is it possible, for example, for girls and boys to access what we're doing, for women and men to benefit from it? Are there marginalised populations who won't be able to access what the partnership's attempting to deliver for particular reasons that we could also think about at the outset in terms of the project design to ensure we're really dealing with that? I'm always keen from the outset to put in some targets on the sort of the equity side, to make sure that actually there is going to be that that balance? And if not, why not? What can we do to ensure it throughout the course of what we drive forward together? Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Nikki, and for highlighting that central, question, especially around what the partnerships are actually trying to achieve. And just a last question for now, before we get to the audience questions, for Albert. I mean, in your experience with working in partnerships, what would you say the key principles are that underpin an effective and equitable partnership? Sorry, Albert, it looks like you need to unmute. Okay.
Okay, I'm now unmuted.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Sorry for the delay. I want to thank you, Pamela, for this question, and Nikki for laying the ground for me. I would like to say, like you said before, Pamela, we're talking about partnerships involving different stakeholders who are based in different parts of the world with different experiences and backgrounds. So it is not an easy process, but it can be made workable through applying equitable partnership principles. And before I mention some of these, I would like to say that it's very important that these principles are co-created by all partners instead of coming from maybe the lead partner downwards. They need to be shared so that there is ownership of these principles. And maybe if I may share the experience from the TESEA project, which we participated in. We right from the beginning, we agreed on these equitable principles that we would follow as a project, and I must say they yielded incredible results during the time of the project. Among them, we said there should be continuous sharing of information and continuously enhancing trust for one another. Likewise, maintaining an openness with colleagues and with one another, but also taking ownership so that we own the decisions that are made instead of being decisions of one partner, and being responsive. This helped a lot too, and avoiding the siloing of work. So in addition, we talked of being conscious of the importance of gender equity in all our work, and then this was not only in the teaching in the classes, but also in the activities we're doing. We're very sensitive whether there's enough representation. We're living what we're preaching, so to say, and then calling on one another for support as need arises, and being able to give support to one another. Because of applying these principles, there was a lot of collegiality in the TESEA project and the openness. All partners participated in the decision making and owned all the decisions that we took, and there was an environment of mutual respect among the partners. And we said we were continuously sharing information and communications we were not only using formal platforms, but also the informal platforms, because we were in different geographical locations and with different means. So we said we use all the possible ways, and this helped a lot to move the things that we're doing. And I must say, eventually, because of these principles, we became like friends, and this continues even after the end of the project. We've formed this partnership going even forward.
Okay.
That's what I could say. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Albert. I'm sorry to rush you because you've got, but I think that's very useful information, and especially the whole thing of laying upfront the terms of engagement, the principles around which you're working with the partnership. I think it's a huge a step and contribution to a successful partnership. Now, thank you very much. So we're going now to the audience questions. Part of the reason I let this discussion go as far as it's gone is because a lot of the questions were drawn from the pre-submitted questions. There were quite a number of them. But I think just for some, interaction with the audience now, it would be a great opportunity to address some of the questions that have been coming through, which are actually unique to some of what has been discussed. And here we will bring in Adam, so that at least you're also involved in this discussion as the lead author of the report. There is a fascinating question here from Mike Winter, saying, can you say more about the influence of university rankings cited as a success factor? Often rankings are a distraction. So Adam, if you could take that question, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for the fascinating questions. Yes, indeed, when we were conducting the research, we came across the influence of international university rankings, but also the role of national higher education frameworks in some of the countries, and their influence on how international higher education partnerships, but also on how higher education institutions in general, how they think about international cooperations. And this is often because we see that in more and more cases, in more and more of these international rankings and in more countries, international collaboration and international mobility or international projects in general, internationalization, is becoming one of the indicators used in higher education funding formulas. So that's obviously then one of the motivations for universities to sort of look for international partners and to think about creating and establishing international partnerships, could be with other universities or other types of organizations. So indeed, we came across this as one of the drivers, and seems to be playing a larger role than before.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you so much, Adam. Now we're taking some of the most liked questions that are coming through from the audience. There's one from Karen from the University of South Wales, which says the COVID-19 pandemic has now embedded the idea that remote to campus is not necessarily a barrier to access to higher education. Is this an opportunity for extending access to higher education to more remote developing areas via more digitally delivered degrees supported by higher education? I'm not sure. I'm sure you can all see that on the screen. So if I mean, really, maybe again from you, Adam, in your report and the interviews that you had, because the whole issue of COVID-19 also came up, and the barriers that might cause in continued international higher education partnerships and so on. And maybe if you could share some insight in terms of how, in addressing this question.
Yeah, absolutely. The pandemic was obviously coming up as one of the most important issues and very on our in our consultation for the report. And I think we've already mentioned today some of the ways how universities are trying to overcome this. One of the ways is obviously shifting everything to the online space, and we know that there are some negatives linked to working completely online. In terms of higher education, in international higher education partnerships, what we have seen is that some of the positives that actually this online working space brings is that all partners have now more opportunities to sort of be involved, to become involved in all discussions, which pre-COVID didn't seem to be always the case. That we've seen examples where the communication would be generally between the lead partner and the funder, for example. With COVID, we've seen some of the other partners having opportunities to speak directly with the funder of the partnership, for example, which sort of improves the equity as well. But there are also some negatives that we have observed, and they are mostly around the way how higher education partnerships are established. And we know that the importance of prior relationships between the partners before they actually set up or establish a partnership formally is very important. Now, when everything is happening online, we see fewer opportunities for partners to actually get to know each other, to build that necessary level of trust, and to be able to establish the partnerships. So the partnerships that started pre-COVID seem to be going quite well during the COVID-19 pandemic, but unfortunately there may be fewer new partnerships being established as a result of the pandemic. Yeah.
No, thank you. There's also another aspect to this question, actually, that maybe Albert, you might help, address as somebody involved within North-South partnerships also, especially the aspect of, higher education access in remote developing areas, and if there would be, more digitally delivered degrees, if they would be supported by higher education partners. Unmute, please. Sorry, you're still muted. Now we can hear sound. You can talk.
Sorry. Sorry. I would like to say that in our context, the pandemic was both an opportunity, but also brought challenges, because there was much shift to virtual learning and teaching in many universities, which helped many learners to continue learning during the lockdown. But at the same time, it created a gap between the students that come from poor families and those who come from areas where there is a poor or no internet connectivity, and those who had no gadgets to be able to learn online. So I would think it would be a very important component in these partnerships to create a possibility to extend the connectivity and the gadgets to areas and to people maybe who don't have the privilege to own a computer or a smartphone to be able to learn. So I think it is much possible and may be very necessary today, since educational technologies are going to play a big part in the higher education institutions. We don't want to be left out even in the global south.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important contribution, because I mean, of the drawbacks that the pandemic has had, because even at national government levels in the South, there have been struggles in getting everybody on board in terms of online teaching and learning and so on. So the role that partnerships can make, and the contribution that international partnerships can make in considering these challenges probably would be very, very important. Any input from your side, Nikki, on this question? It's quite an important question that actually takes us also to post-COVID. How do we continue, and while factoring the impact that the pandemic has had?
Yes, no, thank you. I mean, obviously, COVID-19 has just had such an enormous impact across everything that we do. You know, when we look at the work in this space, it's, you know, led to institutions closing, it's led to activities being disrupted, it's prevented some of the face-to-face contact in the partnerships that can really sort of help sort of establish them. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we've seen so many positive examples of how this can be done, how some initiatives that we support have continued remotely, have grown remotely, and have actually had an incredible impact. I mean, I think the person who posed the question asked particularly about very sort of hard to reach areas. There's a great project supported under Sphere, led by King's College London in Somaliland, that has really looked to sort of build up the resilience of the health system there, which has in turn meant it was better prepared to deal with COVID-19. Now, how it's done that is through the UK's National Health Service and UK universities partnering with health schools in Somaliland through distance learning, and ensuring that actually they've really equipped a whole generation of people with the skills they need to operate effectively there. So I think that's a great example of a project that, despite the challenges of COVID, has actually done really well, and that we can learn from and build on going forward. Thanks, Pamela.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you, Nikki. I think as a last question, really, I mean, to be addressed by all three of you, because I'm mindful that we have 2 minutes before Joanna comes in. Yeah, I just want to end with just saying that, you know, it's very clear from the report that there are very positive messages from the study. Evidence that international higher education partnerships address all the SDGs, that research agendas are increasingly aligned to SDGs, and messages around equity and sustainability of partnerships. But now it's 2022, there are just 8 years remaining until we reach the target date of 2030. Do you believe whether we are or not on track to hit the targets? What's next? What do we do to prepare for international higher education partnerships beyond 2030? Maybe starting with you again, Albert.
Thank you, Pamela.
Carry on, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Pamela, for this. In my view, I think, first of all, I want to recognize that a lot has been done, but a lot still remains to be done. And before even I think of the beyond the 2030, I'd like to mention that the pandemic caused a bit of loss of time in realizing the goals of the projects that we had undertaken. And for me, the first thing to do would be to try to complete the good work that had been started with these projects long before even the 2030 deadline, so that what has begun in the few universities, for instance, across our continent, goes also to other universities that have not yet had a chance to have this transformation that we have undergone. But I also wanted to say, since we want equal access to quality education to as many people as possible, there is a need also to review the partnerships, because many times we are moving with the partnerships that have always been privileged to have these fundings, and many times in the context of Africa, these are the giant universities, the public universities, which have access to also state resources. But then you will realize that in Africa, the people who access public universities because of the high cutoff points are also those who come from privileged families. And the majority go to private universities which don't have access. Usually they're small in size, but also having less resources. If we can find a way we bring them in these partnerships, I'm I'm privileged to be party to this, but I come from a remote, smaller private university, and there are not many that have a chance to access this funding, because partners usually look for already grounded universities. So we need to move away from the already privileged universities to include even the others where the unprivileged students go to learn.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'm not sure if you can put in a one-liner, Nikki, because we are running out of time. And
hi, thanks, Pamela. I mean, I suppose the only thing to add to Albert's remarks is that, you know, this is something we're thinking about a lot. It's clear that, you know, the world in 2030 is going to face a lot of unprecedented global challenges, and we need to be, through our international partnerships in higher education, thinking about how can we support the children who are in school now to be the adults that they will be then. Just to flag on this that the OECD has launched the Future of Education Skills 2030 project to really help, you know, countries navigate this, both in terms of the sort of knowledge, skills, attitudes as well, which are fundamental that young people will need, and how this sort of the education sector can help them deal with that. But yes, that was very, very quick, as I know we're under time pressure. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you very much. Adam, unfortunately, I don't think I will get you to come in, but I want to thank Catherine Cole from York University in Toronto, who sent that question. And then as a wrap up, to thank all of you, Adam, for that, outstanding report with your team, and then Nikki and Albert for joining us on this panel, and then hand over back to you, Joanna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and thank you for such excellent sharing, and thank all the participants for a wonderful event. And it just does make me very proud that we're doing this publication, because right from the years ago, actually, there were discussions with the then DFID office and the Foreign Office and others about what is innovation going to produce. And there was a real breakthrough when universities in the UK were then able to apply for funding to get involved in the development story. And I think the Sphere project that the FCDO have run is exemplary in demonstrating innovation and how important universities are in development. And this study is just the start, really, of us taking forward that evidence to the United Nations and other places. So I just want to thank you all again for the really rich discussion, but also Adam for the report, which contains really fascinating insight that will have implications for both funders and universities. And, you know, between us, we have over several thousand universities across the world, with the International Association of Universities, the Association of University Francophonie, and the ACU. And we want to represent that diversity, to Albert's point about being small and private, but also large, research intensive, teaching focused. The partnerships that we help to broker are unique in their offering and provide added value compared to other forms of international development aid. And I think the project that Adam has been in charge of has really shown that. The Pebble programme, for example, has not only done a huge amount of good in East Africa in blended and enhanced learning, again, using the principles that the panelists have talked about, co-creation, co-partnership, building capacity for longer term partnerships, but also it's put the ACU in a position where they can launch similar programs in different regions using that Pebble programme as a blueprint. The research also reinforces a belief that we have that universities are key to achieving all the SDGs right the way through from 1 to 17. And it's a message that we'll be taking with our partners to the high-level policy forum in the United Nations in the summer, but also to the UNESCO World Conference in May. And we'll continue to work in partnership with the British Council on the findings of this report, and we would like to work with the British Council on further events to support our member institutions to develop development impact through our partnerships. Today's session, and I know we're running out of time, has only just touched on the findings of the study, and I'd encourage you all to download it now and digest the details and come back to us. Pamela is co-chair of our SDG and Education Network, and you know, anybody in a university is welcome to join any one of our networks where you can, you know, co-create content, talk to colleagues about research, education, teaching there. But you'll also be able to find 10 really interesting in-depth case studies, which were delivered as part of the research in the downloaded report. An email will be sent out to all registered participants on today's call, which will include a link to the report and a link to a post-event survey, which we would be grateful if all participants could complete. So again, thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for the research that was undertaken by Technopolis. Thank you to the British Council as our partner in this. Thank you for your attention today, and it's been fantastic to join you for this event.